Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth will call William Tarbokas.
Raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear testimony you give to the court and the jury and the issues now pending between the Commonwealth defendant at the bar should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Good afternoon. For the record, could you state your name and spell your last name?
My name's William Tarbokas. It's spelled T-A-R-B-O-K-A-S.
And calling your attention back to April 12, 2018, how were you employed then?
I was employed by the Massachusetts State Police. I was a sergeant at the Crime Scene Services section assigned to the Lakeville office.
And have you since retired?
Yes, I have.
And how long were you with the state police?
I was with the State Police for a total of 28 years.
And specifically, on April 12, 2018, you indicated that you were with Crime Scene Services?
Yes.
And could you please tell the jurors what it is that Crime Scene Services does?
Crime Scene Services Unit is responsible for responding to crime scenes, accidents, industrial accidents. They're responsible for documenting the scene by using photography. They'll take videos of the scene. We'll also process items at the scene for fingerprints or footwear. We'll then compare the fingerprints and footwear to try and determine a source.
And typically, Crime Scene Services goes into a crime scene after a warrant is obtained, but before any other officers go in to search for items. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And the process is to video and photograph the scene as untouched as possible, correct?
Yes, when we respond to a scene, what we try and do is have two people assigned. One person will be assigned to take still photos. The other person will be assigned to take a video. Those two people will enter the scene first and document it as we find the scene, as it's secured for us when we first get there, before anything's moved or gone through anymore by anybody that comes in after.
And specifically, calling your attention to April 12th, 2018, were you working that day?
Yes, I was.
And did you have occasion to respond to a scene at 109 Blueberry Lane in Marston's Mills?
Yes, I did.
And about what time was it that you got there, if you recall?
I got there at about 8:45
And that
in
would
the
be
PM,
in
yes.
the evening. And what did you do when you got there?
When I first got there, I met with the personnel that were already on scene. I met with Detective Lieutenant Bennett from my unit, also Detective Lieutenant Mon from the detectives, as well as Trooper Lombard from Crime Scene Services, and we discussed the plan of action, how to process the scene.
Your rank at that time was what with the state police?
I was a sergeant.
And were you in charge of the crime scene unit at that particular scene?
Yes.
And relative to that plan of processing the scene, what did that entail?
We discussed that Trooper Lombard would be assigned to take the still photographs of the scene as we initially found it, and I would take the video and generate a diagram of the scene as we found it.
And did you do that?
Yes, we did. We did that on the evening of the 12th.
And did you also have occasion to return the next day?
Yes, we did. After initially documenting the scene, it had become late in the evening, and people had been working for approximately, they'd been up for about 20 hours or so. The scene was going to remain static. Nothing would be lost by letting people get some rest and be fresh to come back and complete the scene, so we made the call to come back the next morning. It also gave us the opportunity to bring in the high-definition scanner to scan the attic area and the back bedroom.
Okay. And with respect to that high-definition scanner, is that referred to as the Leica system?
Yes, Leica is the company that manufactures it.
Okay, and if you could tell the jurors what that process is.
Basically, it's based off an engineering technology like a transit, where it's set up and measurements are taken from a set point to different locations. In this case, it's a high-definition, high-tech scanner that uses lasers. It's set up in a scene, and the laser is shot out in 360 degrees all the way around it, and it takes millions of measurements from that location and generates what's called a point cloud. The point cloud is basically just at every angle that that laser hits something, it records the distance and angle at which it went to. And it's an extremely accurate way of measuring in...
Overruled.
It's an extremely accurate way of measuring an area. It's used in engineering for building bridges, for building skyscrapers. And what it does is it gives you the opportunity, once this point cloud is generated, to use the software to develop a 3D rendering that gives you spatial awareness within the diagram. If we were to do it with just tape measures, you'd be able to say, well, it was from 12 feet from this location to where that was, but you wouldn't know how high or if there was any elevation change between where you were and where that is. With the 3D scanner, it actually gives you all the dimensions. It's this 3D plane, so you can tell if something's higher, lower, at what angle it is, and how far it is from one object to another within the diagram.
So these multiple data points that are launched out from the Leica machine, that's recorded, and then you're able to download that into some sort of a disk, if you will, or that can be then developed by software?
Yes, the initial scan develops a point cloud, which basically is just all the measurements from where the scanner is. And when they set up the scan, they'll do at least 2 scans in one location so that you can catch blind spots if something's blocked. And what it will do is it will record all those locations, and there are targets placed within those scans. And just like on your camera, if you're trying to take one of those dynagrammic pictures where you take a wide picture and it stitches it together, the computer software that will then stitch those scans together and create one big image. That's downloaded onto a disk, and then it can be sent out to be developed into a 3D rendering.
And particularly with respect to 109 Blueberry, this would be the 13th of April, 2018. Was that Leica process used in the attic area?
Yes, it was.
And how many different positions, if you will, did you observe the Leica to be set in and recorded?
I don't know exactly how many they said. I had 2 people come in. We have one unit that's stored up in Maynard. I had requested that somebody bring it down, and I had signed Trooper Mack and Trooper Donahue to do the scans. I don't know the total number of scans that they took, but it would have been a minimum of 5 to do the total attic.
And you indicated that you had did a video of the scene, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And did you, prior to coming here today, did you have occasion to view a disc with the video that you did on?
Yes, I did.
Approach the witness, Your Honor.
You may.
I ask you if you could take a look at that disc. Do you recognize what that is?
Yes, this is a disc generated from the video was taken at the scene.
By you, correct?
Yes.
Offer this.
No objection.
Without objection, that's received. Is that 6?
That'll be Exhibit 6. Mike, do you have a sleeve for it?
Sleeve.
No. We can get one.
We'll get one.
We'll figure it out.
I'll get one.
That's Exhibit 6.
Thank you. And Your Honor, if I may, we have that loaded onto the digital version of that loaded on. I ask that you can play it at this point.
You may.
Sir, in addition to that video work, you indicated you did still photography of the crime scene, is that correct?
Yes, on the morning of the 13th, I started taking still photos.
And just with respect to the layout of the house itself, as part of your work there, did you also have occasion to do diagrams of the floor layout, particularly of the lower level?
Yes, I did.
Prosecution Witness, Your Honor,
You may.
I'm going to show you this and ask you if you could take a look at that. Did you recognize what that is?
Yes, it is.
And what is it?
It's a diagram that I generated of the first floor of the 109 Blueberry Lane.
And the top diagram, you've included furniture the way it was laid out then, is that correct?
Yes.
And the lower diagram, each room has a letter assigned to it,
Yes, it does.
and what significance is that?
Those letters were assigned by the State Police Detective Unit when they were doing the search of the residence to keep track of where items were located. They gave each room a letter designation.
Offer that, Your Honor.
Is there an objection?
No.
Without objection, that is received. Exhibit 7.
And just with respect to that process of recovering evidence later in that day, was there a standard procedure with respect to how that was collected?
Depending on what it was, if it was a biological evidence that was located, it would be the forensic scientist who would do the collection. If it was a firearms-related piece of evidence, it would be the firearms identification section. If it was something to be processed for latent prints other than a firearm, it would be collected by crime scene, or just general items of evidence would be collected by the detectives unit.
And is it fair to say the process, as they were searching each of those leaded rooms, if someone found some or saw something, they wouldn't touch it, they would call you folks over to photograph it, and then whichever unit that particular piece of evidence fell into would come over and collect it, correct?
That is correct.
And getting back to the photographs, if you will, did you have occasion to take photographs of the attic area?
Yes, I did.
And particularly as shown in the video that you did, there was a ladder in the closet for access into the attic.
Yes, it was.
And that ladder was supplied by law enforcement or fire department in order for you to assist in your responsibilities. Is that correct?
It was supplied, it was supplied, I believe, when they went in to take the K-9 down. It was left in place at that point.
And I'm going to show you what I suggest is photo board number 1, photos A through G, and ask you if you can take a look at those.
Okay.
Do you recognize what's depicted there?
Yes, I do.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of how that back bedroom and attic area looked when you arrived to process the scene?
Yes, it is.
I'd offer this, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
No objection.
Exhibit 8.
Number 8, somewhat.
Relative to those photos that appear on Exhibit 8, I'm going to ask you if you could take a look at the screen. And if you could briefly describe for the jury what that photo depicts.
This is the back southwest corner bedroom that had the scuttle access through the closet up into the attic. And that is the condition the bedroom was in. After we went in, we placarded a couple of items that we were going to be documenting and possibly collecting for further analysis. And you can see the placards there, number 3 and 4 on the bed.
And photo B,
That's the photo standing in that bedroom between those two beds, looking towards the closet. If you go up that ladder, there's a scuttle access through the top of the closet into the attic.
and again, this is a ladder that was supplied by police, correct?
That's correct.
And C,
This is a photo from in the attic looking down through the closet, showing how narrow the access was from the actual closet down into the bedroom.
and the next photo,
That's from the attic, showing the top of the ladder coming up into the attic.
now, if you could, draw your attention to this area up in there. What does that depict?
That depicts the opening. There was an opening where a secondary addition was put onto the house and a new roof line was added in. That depicts where the old roof line was cut and allowed access into the new roof line on the addition.
Next photo. And do you recognize what that depicts?
Yes, that's just looking down from the top of the ladder, some red-brown staining that was around the top of the ladder.
Next. And that photo?
That's if you were to go up into the attic, once you come up the top of the ladder, and if you were to look to your left, or if you're looking towards the front of the house, you'd look to your left, and that would be the far end of the attic, like over the living room.
Okay. And this photo?
That would be as if you walk down past that chimney that you saw in the last photo. For some reason, the rafters went into a different formation down there, and that would be looking out towards the very end of the house over the living room.
And then, may I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Show you photo board number 2, photos H through M.
Okay?
And do you recognize what's depicted there?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
Those are photos inside the attic, one starting at the top of the ladder, looking towards the opening between the two roof sections, and the others would be actually inside the secondary roof or over the little addition, looking back out towards the main roof, main attic area.
And is that a fair and accurate representation of how that attic area would you in there?
Yes, it is.
I'd offer these as well.
No objection.
Without objection, Exhibit 9.
And I'm going to ask you, if you could, describe what's depicted in this particular photograph.
That would be the access between the old roof line and the new roof line. If you were to be standing looking towards the front of the house in the attic, that would be to the right of the ladder, heading towards, heading over that secondary addition.
And as part of your duties and responsibilities, did you have occasion to measure the opening there, the left side opening?
Yes, the dimensions between the rafters and where the plywood was cut was approximately 27.5 inches high by about 12 inches wide.
And that's between those two rafters there, correct?
That is correct.
And relative to the size of the opening where the wire goes in there?
That opening was a lot narrower. The widest opening was the opening between the two rafters. That opening was narrower. It'd be too small for anybody to go through.
Okay. Next photo. Please describe what's depicted here.
This is a photo looking at between those two rafters. The opening that I described is 27.5 inches by 12 inches wide.
And again, what's depicted here.
That's going through that opening, looking into the secondary part of the roof where the addition was put on.
And if you could describe what's depicted here.
That's if you, once you got into the secondary part of the attic, that would be looking back towards the main house, and that's that same opening, only from the other side, and the rafters that were measured between are holding up that roof that you're looking at with the partially shingled section.
And in particular, the opening here looks considerably wider. Were alterations made to that opening in order to process the scene?
Yes, they were.
And specifically, if you recall, what was done?
That one of those rafters was cut at the top and bottom of the opening to allow access for the high-definition scanner to fit through to bring it in to scan inside there.
Okay. And also, was there a small piece of the plywood at the bottom of the opening that was removed as well?
Yes, that came off with the rafter.
And again, please describe this photo.
That's a photo, again, just looking up at an angle from the bottom of that roof up towards where that opening is.
Next photo. And if you could describe what's depicted here.
That's, again, the same thing from the secondary attic area over the addition, looking out towards the main roof. You can see the opening after it had been cut to allow the Leica scanner to get in.
And just with respect, back again to the Leica scanning and the data cloud that was created as a result of that Leica scan, with respect to those data points and cloud, were you aware that those were sent off to be developed, if you will?
Yes, I was.
And what was the result of that development?
Overruled.
The result of the development was a rendering, a 3D rendering made by the company that used that point cloud that I had discussed that takes all the measurements in 360 degrees to generate a 3D representation of the attic to visualize.
And did you have occasion to view that rendering?
Yes, I did.
And based on your review of that, is it a fair and accurate representation of how the attic appeared when you were there, when you videoed and photographed it?
Yes, it is.
We show you a disc and ask if you recognize what that is.
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
This is that point cloud that was processed into a 3D rendering.
And that's the rendering that you viewed?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I offer this at this point.
Objection.
I'll see you at sidebar.
Thank you.
All right. How is this contained? On a CD or on a disc or what?
I have a disc, but we also have it loaded onto the laptop here.
All right. Well, the disc may be received for identification.
Identification E, Judge.
Do you intend to publish this disc now?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you a limiting instruction as it relates to this piece of evidence. I'm receiving this not as an exhibit, but as an item for identification. What I believe the testimony has shown is this is a 3D recreation of attic space according to measurements taken by this witness and his team. And so it's a computer rendering of what the attic looked like, I guess, dimensionally. And it is being admitted, not as an exhibit, but essentially as what we would call a chalk. that is, a graphic demonstration of something, in this case of the attic design and features, offered to assist you in understanding what that attic looked like. But it is not a photograph. It is not a video recording of the actual attic itself, and therefore, it's only an aid to you in understanding the evidence. It is not an exhibit per se, but it's an aid in assisting the witness in testifying and assisting the jury in understanding the testimony that is received. And I'm told that essentially this is a computer recreation, like an architectural drawing, and it is clear, I believe. But understand, it does not necessarily represent the way in which that attic would be viewed or seen at the time that there was activity taking place on April 12th. That is, I don't know, the evidence may show that in fact there was very little light in the attic, that it was largely dark and illuminated only by flashlights or whatever other devices there were. So please don't think that this representation is a depiction of what anyone who was in the attic could actually see. But it's only for you understanding the layout and the design of the attic, of its roof line, and of what's been described as a different space that was not visible initially. Mr. Trudeau.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's all I have for this witness, Your Honor.
Very good, thank you. Mr. Krowski,
Judge, can we just take a 2-minute break, please?
why don't we take a 7-minute break?
Perfect, even better. Thank you.
Enough time for you guys to get out, get settled, come back in.
Rise for the jury, please.
I told you earlier, this is being shown on Zoom, or there's a Zoom connection. And the camera, I'm told, was inadvertently capturing a side profile of one of our jurors, so juror in seat number 15. We've relocated you to avoid any inadvertent filming. With that said, let us have our witness resume. Mr. Krowski.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You first arrived at 109 Blueberry later on in the afternoon, right?
No, I got there in the evening, like 8:45.
Okay. Suffice to say, you weren't precipient to anything that had transpired earlier in that day.
No, I was not.
You were not a witness to the shooting.
No, I was not.
You were not a witness to Mr. Latanowich being taken into custody.
No, I was not.
You don't know Mr. Latanowich.
No, I do not.
You were assigned a very specific task, correct?
That is correct.
To get there and to document the scene, correct?
Yes.
And to assist with evidence preservation, right?
Yes.
You went there, and it wasn't just you. Collectively, there are other people assigned to your unit, correct?
Yes. In total, I believe there was 5 people assigned to my unit over the 2 days.
You get there, and each person gets a designated assignment to accomplish.
Yes.
Now, one of the things you did, I'm sure, when you were walking around when you first got there is you were taking notes, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And taking notes is good police practice, right?
Yes.
Okay, you do it, well, congratulations, you're retired, but you used to do it as a matter of practice whenever you would go to a scene, correct?
That is correct. Yes.
Whenever you were part of any type of investigation, right?
Correct. Yes.
Because like everyone, memories fade as time goes on, right?
Yes.
And then you take those notes, according to policy, and reduce them into a report, right?
Yes.
And you would write a report for each scene that you visited, correct?
Depending on if there was something that substantiated a report, sometimes we'll go to a scene and nothing's actually collected or whatever, and we'll just go off the report of the investigating officer.
Okay. Who, in your mind, was the investigating officer? Would it have been Trooper Mon?
He would have been the senior detective. I'm not sure who was assigned the actual case for the detectives at the time.
Did you know back on April 12th, 2018, did you know Officer Van Ness from Yarmouth?
Yes, I did.
Did you know Officer Geary?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And you knew Trooper Turgeon, correct?
Yes.
Prior to setting up to take photographs and to do the Leica technology inside the attic, did you get information from them so you could make the conditions look as close as possible to how they looked when they went in the attic?
No, I did not.
And when I look at all these, strike that, could we just have Ward 1, if we could do picture B, please. Okay, you see that picture of the ladder entering up into the access to the attic, correct?
That is correct.
You learned that that wasn't the actual ladder used by officers Gannon, Van Ness, and Geary to go in the attic, correct?
That is correct.
You never had any of them come and display or recreate the actual ladder they used and position it the way they used it, correct?
That is correct.
So although this is a fair and accurate depiction of the way that closet looked like when you got there, it's not a fair and accurate depiction of the way the closet looked when the incident took place.
Yes, it's a different ladder.
Could you go to, please, picture F? Now, we're calling it an attic. It's really a crawl space, correct?
It's very limited in size, yes.
You referred to rafters, right?
Yes,
And what a rafter is essentially a beam that goes from the eaves up to the peak of a roof. That's the definition of a rafter, correct?
yes,
And trusses are rafters, but they're just prefabricated all at once, right?
to my knowledge, a truss involves both the supporting, the ceiling support and the rafters in one unit.
When you get to the top of the peak of that attic, what's the measurement for that?
I do not know.
Okay, you didn't take that measurement,
No, I did not.
but you went up in the attic.
Yes, I did.
You can't even stand up in that attic, can you?
No, I could not.
And you're about 5'10"?
6'3".
Wow. And you couldn't, and you couldn't stand up in that attic, could you?
No, I could not.
Did you take any measurements of the heights as it went down?
No, I did not.
You were asked if this is a fair and accurate depiction of the attic, correct?
Yes,
The picture you took right there involved the use of artificial light, correct?
you have to use artificial light because you can't take a picture in darkness. The natural light, the eye picks up things a lot more than a camera or a video camera is able to, so we need to use a flash or an artificial light in order to even capture a picture.
Is that a long way of saying yes, you used
Yes.
artificial light? Okay. Because without artificial light, when you were up in that closet, you couldn't see anything, could you?
You could make out something, but you would not be able to see the full length of the attic, no.
Well, how far could you see?
I couldn't estimate the distance.
Did you attempt taking a picture without the use of artificial light so the jury could get a more accurate depiction of what the attic looked like during the incident?
No, I did not.
Leica technology essentially sends out lasers and takes detailed measurements by measuring all angles, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so state police, you have a ton of resources, right?
We have resources. I wouldn't go as far as saying a ton.
Did you have the availability to do a sound study?
I've never done a sound study. I've heard of one done.
Okay. The state police have never done one?
I don't know if they have. I was in the unit for 15 years and I've never heard of one done.
But you know what acoustics are, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and you know what decibels are, correct?
Yes, I do.
Now, the next board, please. Picture H. And the one with the cutout, please, if you could.
This one?
Yes. That right there where I'm pointing to, that's the opening into the attic, correct?
Yes, it is.
When you climb up that ladder, you can essentially only go left, correct?
Practically, yeah. You could, maybe you'd have to low crawl to go out to the right, but the roof line is very low at that point.
And there's very little space between these two rafters and the cutout.
Between which two rounds?
The two rafters right there by the ladder and the actual opening down into the closet, correct?
You mean height-wise going up?
Distance-wise. How
Yeah.
far is the rafter to the cutout?
I'd be guessing, but probably 2 feet.
Meaning you can't even step off to the right, correct?
No, you wouldn't be able to step, no.
So you come up and essentially you go left.
Yes,
Now, when you said this is a fair and accurate depiction of that cutout, this too was using artificial light, correct?
yes,
And you went up in that attic, right?
yes.
And did you go up in that attic without any lighting at all, to just on your own with your own two naked eyes to try to get a visualization?
When we first stuck our head up in there, before the light went up, it was dark.
It's so dark that when you climb up there, you can't even see those openings, can you?
It'd be hard to pick out, yes.
And you didn't try to take a photograph of that without the use of artificial light, did you?
A photo wouldn't come out
Because it was that dark.
because the camera can't pick up what the human eye can pick up, no.
Can we go to, on board 2, picture K, please? Which one you got? So this is, so the jurors can see the exact opposite of that cutout, correct?
Yes,
And this area was all enclosed, correct?
the opening was there, but other than the opening, it was enclosed.
Right. So the addition covered what looked to be like an old roof
Yes,
to
it
that property. One of the things, again, you said, it was a fair and accurate depiction, again, artificial light, correct?
yes,
And did you come over to this area of this room and try to make visualization to see how far you could see with the naked eye?
no,
The cutout. That cutout is not how it was when the incident happened, correct?
in this picture, no.
Okay, because you made a wider cutout to use your Leica technology.
Yeah, cut one of the rafters and a little bit of the board underneath to fit the Leica unit through.
Did you take a picture of the cutout from this perspective as it would have looked when the actual incident happened?
I believe there is a picture, yes.
That rendering that we saw, the animation, right?
Yes,
Okay. Even though it showed in the animation a step ladder, it still utilized the ladder that was there when you arrived, correct?
I don't understand the question.
In the animation, it shows the step ladder, correct? The shorter of the two ladders?
Yes,
But the actual ladder that was in the photograph that was part of that recreation was the ladder depicted in picture B, correct?
that is correct.
Is there any reason that you didn't use a picture of the real ladder?
I didn't make the rendering, so I don't know why that was done.
Were you there when it was being made?
No, I was not.
Did anyone think to bring officers Van Ness and Geary or Trooper Turgeon when the rendering was being made so that they could provide accurate information to how the attic actually looked when the incident took place?
I was not there when the rendering was made. I don't know.
You went there the next day, correct?
Went where?
You went to 109 Blueberry on the following day, correct? After everyone got their rest and was refreshed?
On the 13th, yes.
Okay. Was, in your presence, were officers Van Ness or Geary or Trooper Turgeon brought back to the scene?
No, they were not.
That rendering, without watching it again, it shows a very bright space, correct?
Yes, it shows a fully lighted space so you can see all the structural elements of the attic.
And you would agree that's not a fair and accurate depiction of that crawl space as it existed on April 12th at the time of the incident?
Structurally, it's a very fair and accurate. The lighting is increased so that you can actually see the way the attic is laid out.
Okay. Because you couldn't see the way the attic was laid out during the time of the actual incident,
It was
correct?
dark and the visibility was limited.
And wouldn't you agree that that rendering makes it look like there's actual more headroom than there actually is?
I don't know that it makes it look like there's more headroom. It's just, it looks bigger because it's lighter.
But you agreed at no place in that entire crawl space could you stand up.
Yeah, I don't think there was a place in the attic you could stand fully up.
And as a matter of fact, as they got closer to the eaves, you had to crouch, correct?
Yes.
Nothing else.
Any redirect, Ms. Trudeau?
No, Your Honor.
Very good, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're excused, subject to recall.
Thank you.
Commonwealth.
Special Agent Sean Geary.
Raise your right hand, please. Solemnly swear testimony you give to the court and the jury and the issues now pending between the Commonwealth defendant and the bar should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
Good afternoon. For the record, could you state your name, please, and spell your last name?
My name is Sean Geary, spelled Geary.
And how are you employed?
I'm employed as a special agent with the United States Drug Enforcement Administration.
And how long you been with the DEA?
I've been there for approximately 3 years.
And prior to that, were you employed in law enforcement?
Yes, I was.
And where was that?
I was employed by the Yarmouth Police Department.
And how long were you with the town of Yarmouth?
Approximately 7 years.
And calling your attention back to April 12, 2018, where were you working at that point?
I was employed by the Yarmouth Police still at that point.
And what rank were you?
Patrol officer?
And specifically calling your attention to that day, do you remember what your shift was that day?
Yes, my normal shift would have been noon to 8 p.m. However, on that day, I started around 8 o'clock in the morning. I had a special assignment to do in the morning.
Okay, and what assignment was that?
It was Dennis Yarmouth High School's career day, so I did that for the first 4 or so hours of my shift.
And then after that, did you have occasion to go back to the Yarmouth Police Department?
Yes, that ended maybe around 11 or noon or so, and after that, I went back to the Yarmouth Police Department.
And then what did you do when you got there?
Once I arrived there, I met with Detective Van Ness, Trooper Mike Turgeon, and Officer Nick Ambrosini.
And what was the purpose of that meeting?
It was to brief an arrest operation that we had planned for later in the day.
And what was that? Who was the target, if you would, of that operation?
The person we planned to arrest was Thomas Latanowich.
And how is it that you came to reach out to Trooper Turgeon?
I did not reach out to him directly. Detective Van Ness has a working relationship with him, so he reached out to him and requested the Mass State Police's assistance.
And about what time was it that you all got together at the Yarmouth Police Department?
Roughly noon, I'd say.
And once you were there, what happened?
We met in the front parking lot. Myself, Detective Van Ness, and Officer and Trooper Turgeon met in the front lot. We began to discuss the arrest, where we might be able to locate Mr. Latanowich, addresses he was known to be associated with, cars he might be driving, associates of his that he might be hanging out with. So we discussed that, worked out possible addresses that we might check later in the day.
And you were aware that an arrest warrant had issued for him as a result of the probation situation, is that correct?
Yes, he did have an arrest warrant at the time.
All right, pause here. Ladies and gentlemen, let me give you one of those instructions I told you I may give through the course trial, and it relates to the testimony you just heard. That is that this officer and others were seeking to execute an arrest warrant issued for a probation matter. this evidence is admitted for a very limited purpose. It is admitted to show why the police were interested in Mr. Latanowich and to explain the police conduct and actions taken to effectuate that arrest warrant. It is not to be considered in any way as any evidence of any bad character on the defendant's part. It is not admitted and may not be considered in any way as evidence of a propensity to commit crime or to engage in criminal activity. And further, it's not admitted to show that the defendant had a criminal history or record for which he was on probation. You are not to speculate in any way as to why Mr. Latanowich may have been on probation. That's not relevant to the issues here. The only relevance of this testimony and evidence is that it explains why the police were focused on this defendant and what they were doing as a result, and not for any other purpose. Mr. Trudeau.
Thank you. And while you were at Yarmouth Police Department and you were discussing plans for this warrant apprehension, did you have occasion to be contacted by someone?
Yes, we did.
Okay, and who was that?
Joshua Jokum.
And where was he at that point?
He was in the Yarmouth Police Deputy Chief's office.
And then as a result of that contact, did you have occasion to go back into the Yarmouth Police Station? Upstairs?
Yes. Myself and Detective Van Ness went to speak with Mr. Jokum.
And as a result of that conversation, did you receive some information?
Yes, we did.
And was that information potential addresses as to where Thomas Latanowich, the defendant, would be?
Yes, it was.
Or might be, I should say.
Yes, where he might be located, yes.
And as a result of receiving that information, what, if anything, did you, Trooper Turgeon, and Officer Vaness, and Officer Imbrasini do?
Based on that information, we decided to drive to the town of Barnstable and check those two locations.
And prior to you arriving at those locations, did you or someone else have occasion to notify Barnstable Police Department?
Yes, while we were driving there, I called the Barnstable Police Department. I spoke to a dispatcher and advised them that the Yarmouth Police and the Mass State Police were going to be in their town with the intention of making an arrest of Mr. Latanowich, that we'd be checking multiple locations for him, and that we would call them back if the need arose.
And is that standard procedure for you to do?
Yes, it is, to notify another town that we'd be entering their town.
And is the reverse of that true? If Barnstable comes into Yarmouth, they would notify you, correct?
Yes, exactly.
And after you notified that, what next happened?
I called the Barnstable Police. I let them know that we'd be in the town. At that point, we drove to an address on Santuit Newtown Road. We didn't stop at that address based on vehicles that we saw in the driveway. We thought that that house most likely was not the house we were looking for. So we continued on to a second address. And
what were you driving for a car?
My car that day was a black Nissan Maxima, no police markings, an undercover vehicle.
And what were you wearing for?
On the left sleeve would have been a Yarmouth Police patch, and on the right sleeve would have been an American flag. I had jeans on and sneakers. I also had a badge on my waist and a badge hung around my neck.
One moment. May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
To show you this photograph, ask you to take a look at it. And do you recognize what that is?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
That's the sweatshirt that I was wearing as part of my uniform that day.
Very good. Offer this.
No objection.
Without objection, that is received.
Exhibit 10, so marked.
And were you in that black Nissan Maxima by yourself?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And where were Trooper Turgeon and Vanessa in relation to you on the road?
I'm not sure exactly if they were driving directly behind me or if Officer Ambrosini was behind me. Trooper Turgeon and Detective Van Ness were in Detective Van Ness's truck together. And the three cars convoyed to the area, but I'm not sure of the exact order.
Okay. And Officer Vanessa's truck, did that have police markings on it?
No, that's another undercover vehicle. It's a silver Ford F-150 with no police markings.
And with respect to Officer Ambrosini, what was he driving, if you remember?
That's not a Ford Police Interceptor sedan. Looks like a police car, but again, with no markings. It's silver in color.
And generally, in your experience, when you're out apprehending someone on an arrest warrant, do you drive in marked police cars?
As part of the unit that I worked on, the proactive anti-crime unit, we generally did not drive marked police cars.
And what happened after you left the Newtown Centuit address?
After we left that address, we drove to the area of Blueberry Lane in Marston's Mills.
And what happened when you got there?
I drove down the street first. We didn't have a specific address on the street to look for, so we were looking for vehicles possibly associated with Mr. Latanowich or something to draw our attention to a specific house. I drove down the street first and didn't see anything that stood out to me. Detective Van Ness drove down the street after me and noticed a tree company truck that piqued his interest.
And as a result of noticing that tree company truck, what happened next?
Because we had noticed that truck, Trees R Us, tree company truck, we decided that that was likely the address in question. And we formulated a plan over the radio to park several houses down from that and walk up and knock on the door and attempt to speak to somebody.
And did you do that?
That did not happen. After Detective Van Ness circled the neighborhood, I began to drive down the street again. At that point, I was passed by the person I knew to be associated with that tree company truck. He was driving a black Chevy Silverado.
And did you recognize who that was?
I did. I knew that person to be Robert Bergen. I had past dealings with him as a police officer, and I knew him, and he knew who I was when we passed each other.
And then what happened at that point?
At that point, it was our thought that Mr. Bergen may notify anybody inside of that house of our presence. So Officer Van Ness and I parked our cars quickly and established a perimeter on the house to make sure that nobody came in or went out. And Detective Van Ness stopped Mr. Bergen and had a conversation with him. Made a motor vehicle stop on that Silverado.
And did you say Detective Ambrosini or Officer Ambrosini and you went out and formed a perimeter?
Yes.
And if you recall, what was Officer Ambrosini wearing for a uniform that day?
A very similar uniform to mine. I know he had the same sweatshirt on. I'm not sure exactly what he was wearing for pants, but he would have had a badge on as well, like I did.
And then where were you located in relation to 109 Blueberry Lane yard area?
I was so Blueberry Lane is a north-south road. The house would be on the west side. We parked south of the address. I went around the first corner, or the south side of the address, into the backyard on the southwest corner, and took up a position in the back to see the back of the house.
All right, one moment, if I could. believe that's exhibit number 1 that we've introduced. Ask you if you could, officer, take a look at this and do you recognize what's depicted there?
Yes, I do.
And what do you see there?
In the center of the picture is 109 Blueberry.
And if you could, you indicated where you parked your cruiser or car when you arrived.
Yes.
If you could indicate where that was on this photo.
Would you like me to step down and point to it, or just?
You may, please don't speak as you pass by.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And then again, you indicated that you took a perimeter position in the backyard, and if you could describe in this photograph where that is.
So the house in question and the backyard of the house were on the left side of the residence, kind of underneath the green trees in the back.
All right. And relative to Officer Ambrosini, were you able to see where he was positioned?
I knew he took a position in the front of the house, but from where I was, I couldn't see his position.
And then, while you were there, what next happened?
As I was making my way to the back of the house, I heard noise coming from inside of the house.
And what type of noise?
No talking or speaking, just the sound of kind of a commotion in the house, almost a lot of furniture being moved around. That's what I thought this noise sounded like, but furniture being moved around and shuffling around inside of the house.
And did that lead you to believe that someone was inside the house?
Yes, it did.
And then, once that happened, what next did you do?
I continued to my position in the back of the house, where I stayed for several minutes, during which time Detective Van Ness was making a motor vehicle stop of Mr. Bergen. So I stayed in the back of the house for several minutes.
And when you arrived, about what time was it that you got there?
Arrived right around 2 p.m.
And how long were you in the outer perimeter, if you will, the backyard?
I was only in the backyard for a couple minutes. I'd say no more than 5.
And at some point, did Officer Van Ness come back to 109 Bluebird?
Yes, he did.
And what happened when he returned?
He returned back to 109 Blueberry along with Mr. Bergen, who was still driving his own truck.
And was there anybody with Mr. Bergen?
There was nobody in the car with him. However, there was somebody else in the front yard.
And then what happened next after they all arrived back, I'm assuming at the front of 109 Blueberry?
Yes, at the front. Somebody relieved my position in the backyard. I can't recall who, but another officer relieved my position in the back, and I made my way to the front yard to speak with Mr. Bergen.
And at some point, was Barnstable called for assistance?
Yes, they were. After Detective Van Ness and Mr. Bergen arrived back on scene, I called the Barnstable Police and requested a marked unit to the house, a marked police car to the house.
And then did officers from Barnstable arrive?
Yes, they did.
And particularly Lieutenant Clark?
Lieutenant Clark, yes, and Officer Carnes.
And when you say someone relieved you from your position in the backyard, do you know who that was?
I don't recall who it was who relieved me. I don't.
But at this point, there's Officer Carnes, Lieutenant Clark, yourself, Officer Ambrosini, Officer Van Ness, and Trooper Turgeon on scene, correct?
Yes, correct.
Let me see if we understand this correctly, sir. Did you say that you called Barnstable after someone relieved you?
I had
You
made,
called Barnstable before someone relieved you?
after somebody relieved me. I called them while I was in the front yard of the residence.
So you left the back before you were relieved?
No, excuse me. Another officer relieved me in the backyard.
Yep.
I went to the front of the residence where I placed a call to the Barnstable Police.
Would it be fair to say then that whoever relieved you or replaced you was not one of the Barnstable officers, but someone else?
Right. It was one of the officers that was already part of the arrest team.
All right, continue, please.
Thank you. So after you came out to the front of 109 Blueberry, what happened at that point?
Like I said, I called the Barnstable Police. I requested a marked patrol car to the house. I then had a conversation with Mr. Bergen.
And what, if anything, happened as a result of that conversation?
As a result of that conversation, I had the opportunity to talk to the woman who was actually renting the house at 109 Blueberry. I was able to speak to her over the phone.
And do you know who that is?
Chelsea Crosland?
And do you know her to also go by the name of Chelsea Bergen?
Yes.
And what was the conversation that you had with her?
I told her that, first I let her know why we were there, that we were looking for Thomas Latanowich and planning to place him under arrest. I then asked her for consent to enter her house to look for him.
And what did she say?
She allowed consent into the house to look for Mr. Latanowich.
And was it a long conversation?
It wasn't, not more than 2 minutes.
And how did she appear when you spoke with her?
She sounded frightened to me.
Objection.
Sustained in that form.
When you spoke with her on the phone, did she appear agitated?
Objection.
I'm sorry, what was the question, sir?
Did she appear agitated?
Sustained.
And after you had that conversation, what next did you do?
After that conversation, I conferred with other officers on the scene to develop a plan to place Mr. Latanowich under arrest.
And what was that plan?
Officer Ambrosini suggested possibly having a canine respond to the scene to assist with the search of the residence. So Officer Ambrosini called Officer Sean Gannon to respond to the scene to assist us.
And did he arrive?
He did.
And did he have his canine with him?
He did.
And are you familiar with his canine?
Yes, I am.
And have you worked with Nero before?
Yes, I had.
May I approach, Your Honor?
You may.
Show you Commonwealth's Exhibit Number 2. And do you recognize who that's a picture of?
Yes, I do. It's a picture of Officer Sean Gannon and his canine partner, Nero.
And the canine Nero was a Yarmouth Police Department canine, is that correct?
Yes, he was.
And after Officer Gannon and Nero arrived, did you continue to formulate an entry plan?
Yes, when Officer Gannon arrived, I advised him of who we were looking for and that we suspected Mr. Latanowich to be in the house and to be in 109 Blueberry. And we formulated a plan to go up to the front door of the residence and attempt to make contact with him.
And did you do that?
Yes, we did.
At that point, were the Barnstable officers there prior to that?
They were.
And who was it that went to the front door?
Myself, Officer Gannon, his canine partner, Detective Van Ness, and Trooper Turgeon.
And what happened when you got to the front door?
The front door was, the door itself was open, but the door was deadbolted. I went back to Mr. Bergen's vehicle and asked him if he had a key to the house.
And as a result of that request, did you receive something?
At that point, I received a key.
And then what did you do with the key?
I provided the key to Officer Gannon, who tried it in the lock, and it worked. The door opened.
And then what happened at that point?
At that point, the door was open to the front of the residence, but nobody had entered yet, and several announcements were made notifying any occupants that the police were at the residence.
Okay. And specifically, who made those announcements?
Officer Gannon made the announcements.
And if you, do you recall, as best you can, what those announcements were?
Yes, he would have notified anybody in the residence that the Yarmouth police were there, that to come out to give themselves up. He would have notified anybody in the house that he had a canine, that if anybody in the house didn't give up, that they could possibly be bit by the canine. After these announcements are made, there's a good amount of time for somebody inside of the residence to provide a response.
Sir, are you testifying as to what happened or as to what would normally happen?
No, this is what happened.
All right, the objection is overruled.
And you said you heard that announcement several times?
Yes, it was given several times.
And was it given several times before you entered or several times while entering and searching different rooms?
It was given several times prior to entering, and then once the entry was eventually made, announcements continued to be made the entire time officers were in the residence.
And relative to the plan that you mentioned about searching that residence, could you tell us what that plan was from your understanding?
Yes, from my understanding, the plan was to utilize Officer Gannon's canine partner to conduct the bulk of the search. He has a long leash. The dog could go out to the end of his long leash and search rooms without officers actually making entry into those rooms to assist in clearing the house safely.
Mr. Trudeau, do you intend now to inquire as to the search inside the house?
Yes, Your Honor.
I think this would be an appropriate point then to pause. We're approaching the 4 o'clock hour. Why don't we take up that testimony on Monday?
Very well, Your Honor. Thank you.
Sir, you may step back.
Thank you,
for a
Your Honor.
moment. Ladies and gentlemen, that is as far as we'll go for today and for this week. We're now going to adjourn until Monday morning at 9 a.m. Remember the instructions that I've given you, please. Do not discuss the case with anyone. Do not read, hear, or see anything about this case, and do not attempt to learn anything about the case independently. Put the case out of your mind, enjoy the weekend, and be back here Monday morning at 9 a.m. Between now and Monday, please avoid risky places and situations. Stay healthy and be here with us on Monday. Thank you all. Our jurors may be excused.
Rise for the jury, please.
And counsel, let me see you at sidebar for a moment, please.